Last week, our nation has migrated over a maddening milestone. Over 100,000 Americans have died to COVID-19. To add insult to injury, on Monday, the scab of America's original sin of racism was ripped off when a 46-year-old African-American man, George Floyd, was handcuffed with a police officer's knee pressed against his neck. George Floyd cried out, "I can't breathe," until he died. In the aftermath of this tragedy, our world has erupted in protest, not only in the twin cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, but also in our own city, Philadelphia, and as far as London, Berlin, Copenhagen, and Milan. While there have been sparks of violence and looting, the vast majority of protesters have been nonviolent. Yet it is important to note that violence of any kind is unacceptable. I am reminded of the sobering words of Dr. King. The ultimate weakness of violence is that it is a descending spiral, begetting the very thing it seeks to destroy. Instead of diminishing evil, it multiplies it. Through violence, you murder the hater, but you do not murder hate. Returning violence for violence multiplies violence, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. How should we respond as a community of educators? First, we must lament. We must grieve. We must mourn. Lamentations is a natural emotional expression of our grief and sorrow. Lament will help us heal. Modern jazz evolved from the blues, and the blues descended from the Negro spiritual, a genre of music that Dr. Du Bois called the music of an unhappy people. Songs like "Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen" and "Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child" are songs that carried a suffering people through lamentable times. People are protesting around the world because they need to lament. We are crying out for justice. Last week, I lamented as I thought about my experience in this nation. I remember as a young man being pulled over by the police in Maryland. I was harassed by a police officer for no good reason other than the concentration of melanin in my skin. I lamented as I thought about my 14-year-old son, James III. When will Dr. King's dream be realized in this nation? When a man will not be judged by the color of his skin, but by the content of his character. Second, we must denounce racism as morally and spiritually wrong. Racism is both taught and caught. Racism is much more than political. It is our responsibility to teach our children that racism is evil and cannot be tolerated in any form, personal or institutional. Its solution rests in repentance, morality, and truth. Consider the faces of the protesters. Like the men and women of the 18th and 19th centuries who denounced slavery and whose work led to its abolition. They come from all walks of life. They are black, white, and brown. They are wealthy and poor. They are urban and suburban. They are famous and not. Third, we must reflect on our pedagogy and changes we can make. Last week, I reflected on my deep dive into critical race theory, culturally responsive pedagogy, and multicultural education as a doctoral student. Critical race theory is a set of beliefs that seek to explain the significance of race and racial ideology on dominant groups and minority groups of color. Among these beliefs are that racism permeates across cultural, legal, economic, and political domains of society. It transcends epistemological realms, and any claim of racial neutrality or colorblindness is really an attempt to mask reality, and racial injustice can only be fully described and understood from the experiences of people of color. Using William E. Cross's model of racial identity development, I ask that you consider the following 7 principles. Number 1, teachers should learn the racial and cultural backgrounds of their students. Number 2, teachers should use student-centered questions that relate to students' experiences to guide thinking. Number 3, teachers should use get-to-know-you activities at the beginning of the school year to help students become acquainted with each other. Number 4, teachers should assign reflective assessments to connect race and culture to historic events. Number 5, teachers should integrate controversial issues into the curricula to make and evoke meaningful discussion and reflection. Number 6, teachers should use multimedia such as video and the World Wide Web as tools to address multicultural issues. And finally, number 7, teachers should provide students with accurate and positive interpretations of race and culture. It is my hope that this message will serve as a sense of inspiration, information, and encouragement. Thank you for your work during these unprecedented times.